This is TWiT.
Apple declined. They had announced and then backed down on including a CSAM tool, a tool for checking for child sexual abuse material on iCloud. They announced it in August, almost exactly 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Then they paused that like a month later because they said, "Oh, yeah, nobody likes this." Especially,
it never went into effect.
Never happened
because it was extremely controversial, obviously, because it involved scanning stuff on people's devices before it was uploaded to the cloud. And I think this is the rare case of them doing a nice job of actually listening to people and taking into account the concerns and then rethinking and deciding not to do something. And especially, I think, with all the other legislation they're now having to fend off about encryption and security, it is real difficult for them to open that door, right? Because if they start scanning for this material, what is to prevent a government asking to scan for some other material that surely you can identify, right? Hey, you did it for this, so perhaps you can do it for terrorism or for stuff we just don't like. So I think they realized that was opening a door they didn't want to open. Yeah,
we talked a lot about it and concluded that it really wasn't a good idea. I mean, look, this is the problem. Nobody thinks this is a good, child pornography is a good thing in any respect. Everybody wants to put the perpetrators in jail and stop the practice. However, there is a limit to how far you can go. I mean, sure, we could catch every criminal if we gave law enforcement, access to our bedrooms and our living rooms as well as our streets. But we all agree that that's, a bridge too far. The reason this is not a dead subject, this week, a new child safety group that calls itself Heat Initiative, again, interesting branding, told Apple it's going to organize a campaign to demand that the company detect, report, and remove child sexual abuse material from iCloud and offer more tools for users to report CSAM to the company. The problem with this is you put out this press release, most people, without thinking, say, yeah, well, that's a good idea, Apple, you should do that, because they don't understand that there's a consequence to doing this. And then it's up to us and others to explain, well, this is the problem. It doesn't stop there.
If you did a questionnaire saying, would you like to have CSAM material banned from the internet, pretty much everyone would be fine with that.
Of course.
But if you said to them, would you be okay with backdooring your personal communications and giving license for the police or anyone else who Congress deems suitable to have access to all of your material? People would be slightly more iffy about that.
Yeah, it's an easy win for politicians, right? Like, because for them to come out, like you just said, to come out saying, like, I'm against this and this is what we're going to do to stop this. It's like everyone, again, no one wants to be the person to stand up to them and be like, yeah, but, and then because they'll immediately get branded as supporting these terrible things that happen, right? Which is not what we're saying. It's just, it is a complex issue and it has implications well beyond this. I mean, this is, I'm sure Ian, has thoughts on the encryption laws that are now being floated in the UK as well as elsewhere, and like similar issues, right? Yeah, you could use these to do things against, people who are doing nefarious things, but what are the consequences and implications of doing that all over?
Well, in the British case, the Home Secretary was like, well, technology is under development, which will allow us to both, secure end-to-end encryption and find this couple.
Someday.
I've been hearing that for 10 or 15 years now, and it's never going to happen.
Is that magic? Is that what that technology is? Is it magic?
Well, this is it. It's like the old saying, you can't get a little bit pregnant. You either, you go the whole hog or you don't.
And as somebody in our IRC is saying, the problem is in many countries, being gay is considered harmful to children. It's starting to become that way in this country, sad to say. And so if you start enforcing this, where do you stop? And do you give Saudi Arabia the ability to hang gay people because, you're giving them names and addresses of people self-identifying on the website? That's not good. So this is Apple's response. So this is interesting because normally Apple, I think, Dan, during this whole thing, Apple's said nothing and they just let it play out. But they're taking this Heat Initiative petition seriously. Apple's director of user privacy and child safety sent a response to Wired saying child sexual abuse material is abhorrent. You have to say that. That has to be the first sentence. Yes, it's horrible. And we are committed to breaking the chain of coercion and influence that makes children susceptible to it. Yes. But after collaborating with an array of privacy and security researchers, and this was 2 years ago, digital rights groups, child safety advocates, the company concluded it could not proceed with the development of a CSAM scanning mechanism, even one built specifically to preserve privacy. This is the quote: "Scanning every user's privately stored iCloud data would create new threat vectors for data thieves to find and exploit. It would also inject the potential for a slippery slope of unintended consequences. Scanning for one type of content, for instance, opens the door for bulk surveillance and could create a desire to search other encrypted messaging systems across content types." Apple's really come around on this, because I remember 2 years ago, they weren't quite so adamant about that, right, Dan?
No, yeah, they very much promulgated it on the idea like we have found this perfect solution to that bridges privacy and the ability to actually act against this. And Apple at its worst is often very convinced of the fact that it is incredible and amazing and has no faults. And I credit them for taking a step back and actually not only discontinuing this program, but now speaking out about it. I think is a good move on their part. So it may be a 180, but I think there's value to saying we have more information and we've reconsidered, right? There's a lot of people, politicians, again, especially, that would never do that. They would never turn a 180 on that, because you got to stay the course and stick to it. But there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, we did more research. People talked to us, we learned something, and we decided, you know what, that is not the best approach to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had something similar in the UK with the Ripper Act, which was introduced after the bombings in London, which would basically allow the police much easier access to search all your documents. And then when they published the legislation, they were allowing everyone down to parish councillors. So that's kind of like the equivalent of your town, your town's elected board, to have access to that kind of information. And luckily, the Home Secretary's son was an IT consultant, and he sat him down and said, look, this is a stupid idea because, and the legislation got amended. But yeah, you're right. No politician wants to be seen to be U-turned, even if they are actually in the wrong and they know it.
Apple said, "We concluded it was not practically possible to implement without ultimately imperiling the security and privacy of our users." That's, by the way, correct, right? And I think it's almost mathematically provable. If you've got a system, however many safeguards you build in, that reveals this stuff, ultimately it can be used to reveal much more and
right.
use. And Apple, the last thing Apple wants to do is get requests from Saudi Arabia to say, hey, tell us who's gay. That's the last thing Apple wants to do. That would be devastating to them as a company.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I think, certainly taking into account Tim Cook's personal life, that I think he would certainly not like to be seen as enabling that kind of thing. And it's this sort of thing, it's the same sort of argument that we're going to be having about encryption laws of the world over, which is you can't make a backdoor that only good guys can access, because there's no card swipey system where you can swipe something and be like, see, it proves I'm a good guy, right? Like, that technology doesn't exist. So as long as you open the door for someone, you're risking opening the door for everybody.
And, if you actually invent a system like that, enforce it and tell people you've got it, Russia, China, North Korea are going to launch mini Manhattan projects to break it. But yeah, I mean, all the politicians can say what they want, but I interviewed Bruce Schneier on this a few years back, and he's like, look, it's mathematics. You can pass all the laws you want, but you can't break fundamental laws of mathematics unless you actually invent a new mathematical system.
Yep. That's kind of what I'm saying is it's very clear there's no way to do this properly. However, it's also very clear that governments will continue to try this. Apple is, and I should mention Facebook with WhatsApp, and other companies, Google, are moving more in a direction of offering full end-to-end encryption to their customers. That's what customers want. That's the right thing to do. It also lets these big tech companies off the hook, because they can correctly say to law enforcement, we can't give you the plain text. We don't have access to that. That's not the case, by the way, with iCloud right now. They do have the keys to that. And that's one of the reasons
for backups specifically. Yes, there is. I mean, like iMessage and stuff like that is end-to-end encrypted. But yeah, if you get your iCloud backups, there are loopholes for some of this information.
Yeah,
and
even Apple, WhatsApp backs up in the clear to iCloud.
Yeah. So, there are always going to be loopholes, and there are some cases where Apple has made choices about these things in order to preserve some degree of convenience, because that's always the balance, right? It's convenience versus security. Because for photos, for example, this was a big deal for a while where, yes, you could Apple would have the keys to your photo backups, but no Apple employee ever wanted to be in a position of having somebody coming to their store and be like, I lost all my photos of my children, of like my, deceased parents or whatever, right? Like they wanted the ability to say like, okay, in certain cases we can restore that. That was a case they made, but they do now offer the ability to further encrypt stuff if you want to, the advanced data protection feature that they rolled out last year. But again, they warn you a lot, like, look, you can do this, but it's really on you. If you lose access to this, it is gone.
Which is what we want. Frankly, this is a trend, and actually I'd love to address this with all three of you, Nicholas and Dan and Ian, which is, it seems to be a trend in our society to blame society's ills on big tech. Like instead of saying, well, what we got to do, we have laws against it, is do a better job of arresting and capturing and locking away these predators. Instead, they blame big tech. Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI's newest product, Insights, assists in closing lucrative skill gaps. Visit go.acilearning.com/twit. Twit listeners will receive at least 20% off or as much as 65% off an IT Pro Enterprise Solution Plan. The discount is based on the size of your team when you fill out their form.